Hello and welcome back to Picks and Portraits. Recently, we looked at the early history of video games through the lens of retrofuturism. We covered the period from around 1950 through the early 1970s. There we saw very primitive examples of video games like Birdie the Brain, all the way up to the commercial breakthrough computer space and the first home console, the Magnavox Odyssey. Today, I'd like to continue this journey by rounding out the 1970s, looking at not only the birth of the modern arcade, but also its golden age, when video games were still the space-age toy of the future. Before we get into that though, this and every video on this channel was made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com/picksandportraits. We do not run ads, we are 100% viewer supported, and in exchange offer a ton of exclusive content. So, if you like what we do and want to help make it happen, please consider supporting us. Patreon.com/picksandportraits. With that plug out of the way, let's head back to the future. Video games were a product of the space age, and last time we briefly explored what exactly that means in relation to the future. I'd like to do the same for this period, because for as similar as its future is, or was, in some ways, it is drastically different. The unfettered optimism of the 1950s and 60s gave way to rational discussions as to whether these imagined amazing futures were even possible, where in the recent past it was believed or hoped that we would have these massive livable space colonies very soon. The reality of space exploration moved much slower. The tensions between the US and the Soviet Union fueled the space race, and America's landing on the moon was seen as the ultimate victory. Space missions like Skylab continued, but post-moon landing, NASA's funding plummeted, as did public interest. Humans' impact on the environment was also becoming known. There were predictions of the Earth's warming due to carbon emissions and the effect fossil fuel production has on our climate. It was becoming clear that resources like water, fuel, food were finite, and that constant increased growth just was not sustainable. Projections of an increased global population pose concerns as well. How will so many people be fed? Where will they live? What will their quality of life be? Some of these projections were made by computers, which were quickly evolving, as we will see. Technology in general was rapidly advancing, more and more, faster and faster. Information became more accessible than ever. We actually made a video on the Tofflers and their concept of future shock, where so much changes so quickly that people just shut down and experience isolation, stress, anxiety. Check that out for more on this, but yeah, sounds like it was a lot to take in, especially when compared to the happy-go-lucky futures imagined just a few years earlier. Still, these issues were still considered far off some other future's problem, and the then present was on the precipice of an entertainment revolution. We saw the dawn of the commercial video game industry last time with the release of Computer Space, created by Ted Dabney and Nolan Bushnell. We focused mainly on marketing material, as graphics weren't really a lot to go off of, and video games were still being marketed as the toys of the future, so that's where we see a lot of the futuristic aesthetics. We will be doing the same in this video, but to understand where the industry came from, we first need to head back even further in time to the 19th century and the penny arcade. These were amusement centers comprised of several coin-operated games, which grew out of the carnival games of chance. It's pretty wild to think about, having to wait months to be entertained, but that was the reality in the 19th century. A few times a year, the carnival came. Hopefully, you didn't miss it. Penny arcades were more or less static carnivals. They had the same types of attractions, fortune-telling, love testing, only they were automated, coin-operated machines. They also had mutoscopes, which were an early way to view film reels individually. Apparently porn films were very popular, which gave penny arcades kind of a seedy reputation. However, this business model was a hit. Whether the penny arcade or the pleasure pier, the idea of an amusement center took. People loved these machines that we could interact with and have fun with. As technology evolved and prices increased, arcades dropped the penny and incorporated different types of games, like light gun games, pinball, and electromagnetical games. These are probably the closest ancestors to what we know as video games. They go back as far as the 1930s with Nematron, which was showcased at the New York World's Fair. These are just fascinating pieces of interactive entertainment. Some had several moving parts and film projection to further immerse you in the experience. Notable examples include Autotest from 1954, which apparently was actually used to help people learn how to drive. Also Periscope, where you could sink ships from a submarine, hugely popular. This is where we start seeing some familiar names: Sega, Midway, Namco, all companies who would transition into video game developers or publishers. These EM games had a huge influence over what gaming would become. Back in the future, the early 1970s, Dabney and Bushnell founded their amusement company Atari and revolutionized the industry with the release of Pong, 1972. It was a game similar to tennis, where two players could hit a ball back and forth, or one player could play against the computer. As we have seen, this isn't technically the beginning of gaming, but it very much is the beginning of modern gaming. The future was here. Arcades exploded. This is also when malls were beginning to be built, and they were a match made in heaven. Machines popped up anywhere there was likely to be children. Pizza parlors, Chuck E. Cheese, also founded by Bushnell, was a chain of restaurants with arcade machines as its backbone. This period, the 1970s and 80s, was the golden age of arcade games. Several iconic games were released: Donkey Kong, Pac-Man, characters that are still around today. I wanted to give them a quick shout out because, as important and popular as they were, that's not our focus here. I'd like to look at more futuristic games. Now, Retrofuturism, just to clear up, is more than just explicit predictions of the future. It can also be an aesthetic or a marketing tool. There is obviously a lot of crossover with science fiction, so some of what we are going to be looking at isn't necessarily in the future, but it definitely will evoke those kind of feelings. While general interest was waning, we are still very much in the space age. So many early games used space as the theme in situations that were just simply not possible then. This makes sense, given gaming grew at a space war. Tons of clones, like Atari's precursor to Pong, Computer Space, which we mentioned last time, or 1977's Space Wars. Early gaming was rife with piracy and plagiarism. Even the largest companies ripped each other off. One of the most influential and copied games was 1978's Space Invaders, developed by Tomohiro Nishikado. This game featured wave after wave of alien forces descending on Earth, and the player was tasked with shooting them down before they landed on the surface. Again, not explicitly futuristic, but looking at the marketing material, we see a few different creative and new spaceship designs. While Pong got people hooked on video games, Space Invaders really kicked everything off. It sold amazingly well and set a new standard, not only for gaming as a medium, but also for gaming profits. Going through these flyers, which were meant for businesses, we see over and over the promise of profits. Mentioned again and again how much money you're going to make. Business was booming. Following Space Invaders' lead, we got Galaxian in 1979, another hugely popular game. Astro Fighter as well, whose marketing is a great example, I guess, of video game pinups. Sex appeal was used to sell games here in the West, while in Japan, where a lot of these games were developed, focused more on futuristic designs. Astro Fighter did both, also tapping into Star Trek here. That same year, Cinematronics released Starhawk, which looks a little different thanks to its use of vector graphics. I don't know, there is something about vector graphics that will always look futuristic to me, in a dated sort of way. Asteroids was another video game benchmark for Atari in the late 70s. Being such a young medium, video games evolved quickly through conversation. One thing inspiring another, or one company, Space War, Computer Space, influencing Space Invaders, which then influenced Asteroids. Things were moving quickly. Into the 1980s, Zero Hour, which had such a great illustration of a ship traveling through meteorites in its marketing material. Stratovox, or Speak and Rescue, another Space Invaders clone with beautiful color graphics, also marketed itself as the first talking video game, having synthesized voices. Also in 1980, another vector game from Cinematronics, Star Castle, as well as Space Zap. As you can see, graphics are quickly improving and becoming more detailed. The next bit of arcade history I'd like to look at is from a little company called Nintendo. While they would go on to later dominate the home console market, Nintendo's earliest video games appeared in the arcade. Donkey Kong was probably the most popular, but they also produced space-related games like Space Launcher and Space Demon. Both were Space Invader clones. Nintendo also released Radar Scope and Space Firebird in 1980. Again, very similar to Space Invaders, and further proof of its just massive influence. 1981, arcades arguably peak in popularity. They are the subject of news reports focusing on parents' concerns of the effect they are having on children. 1981 saw the release of Galaga, notable game, Galaxian sequel. This is also the year Defender was released. It was marketed as a brave new world, and it was in terms of presentation. Its use of side-scrolling back and forth made it so that the player could navigate a world that existed outside of the current screen. Mind-blowing at the time. There was also a mini-map that showed users this world. Scramble, which came out 2 months later, did something similar, but was much more on the rails. The ability to move like this, move around like this, gave Defender a sense of freedom that made the game feel comparably huge. The visuals and sounds were great. This was years ahead of its time, and its contemporaries just a monumental success in the running for the greatest arcade game, at least the most important. Next time, we will be looking at the same period, only for home console gaming, but that is going to be it for today. Now, this was not meant to be exhaustive. I'm not an expert, so let me know if I missed anything. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't, and if you had the means, please consider supporting us on Patreon. You can get access to hundreds of exclusive videos for as little as $5 a month and help keep these videos and Sleepcore coming out regularly. That is patreon.com/pixandportraits. As always, thank you so much for your interest in this channel, and thanks for watching. See you in the future.